The afternoon sun filtered through the dense canopy of the forest of deep shadows, casting dappled patterns across the forest floor. Naruto Uzumaki moved with practiced silence, his orange jacket somehow blending seamlessly into the environment despite its vibrant color, a testament to years of training and countless missions. Beside him, Kakashi Hatake walked with his characteristic ease, though his visible eye constantly scanned their surroundings. Behind them, Sakura Haruno brought up the rear, her medical supplies secured on her back. The mission had been straightforward: investigate reports of missing Nin activity in this region and recover any stolen documents from the Hidden Leaf Village's archives. It was the kind of routine patrol that had become common in recent years, as the world struggled to rebuild after the Fourth Shinobi War. Naruto had grown accustomed to these missions. They were tedious compared to fighting world-ending threats, but he understood their importance. Stay alert, Kakashi's voice was muffled beneath his mask. The last report suggested 3 to 4 individuals. I've got this, Naruto said with his characteristic confidence, though his hand rested cautiously on one of his kunai. He'd learned enough to know that even routine could turn dangerous in an instant. They moved deeper into the forest, following a barely perceptible trail marked by disturbed vegetation and the faint scent of disturbed earth. The forest itself seemed almost oppressively quiet, the usual sounds of insects and birds conspicuously absent. It was the kind of silence that made the hair on the back of one's neck stand on end. This way, Sakura called softly, pointing to an area where the ground had been recently disturbed. Fresh footprints, at least a week old, Naruto estimated, led toward a natural depression in the landscape, likely a cave system. Kakashi signaled for them to slow their approach. They moved with exaggerated care now, every step calculated to avoid disturbing loose branches or fallen leaves. Naruto's senses extended outward, probing the darkness ahead. The Kurama chakra stirred lazily within him, dormant but ready, ever vigilant, ever protective. The cave entrance yawned before them like the mouth of some ancient beast. Darkness pooled within, impenetrable even to their trained eyes. Kakashi performed a series of hand seals, creating a small orb of light that floated ahead of them into the darkness. Empty, Sakura observed as they stepped inside. They've already left. But Naruto's attention had been caught by something else, something his eyes wouldn't have seen if not for the reflected light dancing across the cave walls. There, hidden in a natural alcove perhaps 15 feet up the stone face, was a glint of something metallic. Wait, Naruto said, already moving toward the wall. He leaped with practiced ease, his fingers finding purchase on stone that should have been too smooth to grip. The training of countless years had made his body capable of feats that ordinary humans could never achieve. He reached the alcove and pulled out a scroll case made of what appeared to be ancient bronze. The metal was cool to the touch and covered in intricate sealing marks, so many that Naruto's untrained eye couldn't begin to decipher them all. Careful with that, Kakashi called up, his tone suddenly sharp with interest. Those markings look old. Very old. Naruto descended carefully, the scroll case held protectively against his chest. As his feet touched the cave floor, he could feel something emanating from the object, a subtle vibration, almost like a heartbeat, though far too slow for anything living. What is it? Sakura leaned in to examine the markings, her medical knowledge of chakra pathways giving her some ability to read the more complex seal formulations. I'm not sure, Kakashi admitted, his eye narrowing behind his mask. But we should bring it back to the village. This might be what they were after. The return journey felt somehow longer than the outbound trip, though they encountered no resistance. The scroll case seemed to grow heavier with each mile, or perhaps that was just Naruto's imagination, the weight of the strange object pressing against his consciousness almost as much as his arms. By the time they reached the village gates, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The guards at the gate, recognizing them immediately, waved them through without the usual security questions. Naruto had become enough of a fixture in the village that his arrival rarely warranted more than a nod these days. We should report to Tsunade immediately, Kakashi said, already adjusting his direction toward the Hokage Tower. That scroll is definitely not something we should ignore. But as they climbed the tower's exterior stairs, Naruto felt an odd tingling in his fingers where they gripped the bronze case. The vibration had intensified, almost to the point where it became uncomfortable. He was about to mention this to Kakashi when they entered the Hokage's office. Tsunade looked up from the paperwork that always seemed to consume her attention, her expression shifting from annoyance at the interruption to sharp interest when she saw the scroll case. "Where did you find this?" she demanded, rising from her chair. "Hidden cave in the forest of deep shadows," Sakura explained. "We were following up on reports of missing Nin activity. The cave appeared to have been abandoned." Tsunade moved around her desk with surprising speed, reaching out to take the scroll case. The moment her fingers touched the bronze, however, she pulled back sharply. "That's not a normal seal," she said, her tone grave. "Kakashi, your thoughts?" "I've never seen markings quite like them," the silver-haired ninja admitted, leaning in for a closer examination without actually touching the case. "The complexity is extraordinary. Whoever created this seal wanted to preserve whatever's inside for an extremely long time." "Can you open it?" Naruto asked, though something in his gut was telling him to be cautious about that course of action. "Not safely," Tsunade said firmly. "Not without understanding the seals better. This could be dangerous. There might be protective mechanisms, or the scroll itself might be cursed." She turned to Kakashi. "Take this to the archives. Have Pakin help you move it carefully, and post ANBU guards around it. No one is to touch it without my direct authorization." Kakashi nodded, already moving to retrieve the scroll case from Naruto's hands. But as he reached out, something extraordinary happened. The moment Kakashi's hand came within an inch of the bronze, the seals on the case flared with brilliant light, not the controlled glow of a properly activated jutsu, but chaotic, wild, and absolutely blinding. Naruto felt a surge of energy explode outward from the case, and he reacted on pure instinct. His hands came up, and without conscious thought, the chakra that always flowed through him crystallized into something new. It wasn't the standard defensive jutsu he'd learned over the years. Instead, it was something primal, something that responded to a level of his being he'd never consciously accessed before. A barrier of swirling wind erupted around them, but it was different from any wind technique Naruto had ever performed. It felt alive, sentient almost, responding to his fear and protectiveness with a will of its own. The light from the seals intensified, but it was deflected by the wind, spiraling harmlessly upward toward the ceiling. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos stopped. Naruto stood there, breathing hard, his hands still outstretched in the defensive position. Around them, the room was largely intact, though there was evidence of tremendous force. Papers scattered everywhere, the desk overturned, and deep gouges in the walls where the chaotic energy had lashed out. What was that?" Sakura breathed, picking herself up from where she'd been knocked backward against the wall. "Naruto," Kakashi's voice was sharp with concern. "Are you alright?" Only then did Naruto realize that the scroll case was no longer on the desk. He looked down and found it cradled against his own chest, his arms wrapped protectively around it. The bronze was no longer warm. It was almost cold now, and the vibration that had been so evident before had faded to something barely perceptible. I think so," Naruto said, slowly lowering his arms. But his mind was reeling. Something fundamental had just changed. He could feel it in the way the air itself seemed to acknowledge his presence, in the subtle way the light from the windows bent slightly toward him as if responding to his existence. "That seal," Tsunade said slowly, staring at Naruto with an expression of dawning realization, "it responded to your chakra. It recognized something in you." "Recognized what?" Naruto asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "That," Tsunade said, moving to inspect the damaged room with methodical precision, "is something we need to investigate very carefully. And I suspect it requires more expertise than I possess alone." The night was long, and Naruto found himself unable to sleep. Despite Tsunade's orders to rest, he sat in the specially prepared sealed chamber where the scroll case had been placed, simply staring at it. The room was within the ANBU headquarters, guarded by 4 elite ninja at all times. No one had told him to leave, so he remained, caught in a state of anxious vigil. The Karama chakra stirred within him, responding to something the scrolls seemed to emanate. 9 tails, as Naruto usually thought of the vast consciousness that shared his body, sent waves of unfamiliar sensation through him. Not quite fear, not quite excitement, but something in between, recognition perhaps. "There is something old here," the great beast's voice rumbled in Naruto's mind, a sound like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Something that remembers the times before. I can sense its age, little host, stretching back further than even my memory can clearly grasp. Do you know what it is? Naruto asked aloud, though there was no one to hear but the silent ANBU guards beyond the sealed door. I have my suspicions, the nine-tailed fox replied cryptically. But I would not speak them without more evidence. There are things from the ancient world that were sealed away for good reason. If this is what I believe it to be, the world may be about to change in ways we cannot predict. Before Naruto could press for more information, the seal on the chamber door glowed, and Kakashi stepped through, followed by a figure Naruto didn't recognize. The stranger was ancient, his skin weathered like parchment, his eyes sharp and clear despite the obvious age evident in every line of his face. He wore robes of earth brown and forest green, and carried a staff topped with a crystal that seemed to contain swirling mist. Naruto, this is Elder Kokodan, Kakashi introduced the old man with a tone of respect. He was called from the hidden monastery at Tsunade's request. If anyone in the region can interpret those seals, it's him. Elder Kokodan moved with surprising grace for someone so ancient, approaching the scroll case with an expression of reverent caution. He did not touch it, but circled it slowly, his eyes moving across every visible seal mark. Naruto watched as the old man's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something that looked almost like awe. May I? The elder asked, looking toward Kakashi for permission. Carefully, Kakashi warned. The elder reached out with one gnarled hand, his finger hovering just above the bronze surface. The moment his chakra came close to the seals, they flared again, but gently this time, a soft, golden light rather than the violent explosion that had occurred earlier. The mark seemed to recognize the elder's presence and settled, as if satisfied. By the gods, Kokodan whispered, pulling his hand back slowly. It cannot be. I thought all of these had been lost to time. What is it? Naruto demanded, unable to contain his curiosity and anxiety any longer. This, the elder said, turning to look at Naruto with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, is a covenant seal, one of the original seals created by the Sage of Six Paths during the age when the great powers walked the earth. There are fewer than 100 known to have existed, and fewer still that have survived to the present day. He paused, studying Naruto's face with an expression that suggested he was searching for something specific. Young man, have you always been drawn to nature? To the feel of wind, the presence of water, the pulse of the earth? Naruto opened his mouth to say no, then stopped. Because, now that he thought about it, there had always been something. A subtle awareness of his surroundings that went beyond the normal shinobi senses. The way he could sometimes predict where rain would fall, or sense when an earthquake was coming long before the tremors began. He'd always attributed it to his connection with the nine-tailed fox. But what if? Sometimes, he admitted. Why? Because, the elder said gravely, this seal does not merely preserve something physical. It preserves power, primal, elemental power, and it would not have opened for you unless you possessed the necessary affinity to accommodate what it contains. What kind of power? Kakashi asked, his hand unconsciously moving to his kunai pouch. The kind spoken of in the oldest legends, Kokodan replied, the power to commune with and influence the fundamental forces of nature itself, the control of weather, of growing things, of the very earth beneath our feet. During the age of the sage, there were individuals who possessed such abilities. They were called naturalists, and they were so rare and so powerful that many are now thought to be nothing more than myths. The elder's eyes fixed on Naruto once more. The Sage of Six Paths sealed away the knowledge and power of naturalism, distributing it in repositories such as this one. He believed that one day, when the world was ready, when someone worthy was born, the seals would open again. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. You're saying Naruto is a naturalist? Sakura's voice came from the doorway where she'd apparently been listening, her medical instincts overriding protocol to ensure her teammate was all right. Is that even possible? Anything is possible in this world, Elder Kokodan said with the certainty of someone who had lived long enough to see many impossible things become reality. The Sage of Six Paths himself was a being who transcended normal limitations. If he believed that a naturalist would be born in this age, then his seals would have been designed to recognize that person specifically. So what happens now? Naruto asked. The question that had been gnawing at him since the moment the seals first reacted to his presence. What does this mean for me? The elder was silent for a long moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of ancient knowledge. That, young naturalist, depends on whether you are willing to accept your destiny, or whether you choose to reject it. The power contained in this seal is immense, and it will not be gained without cost. To truly become a master of nature, you will have to change fundamentally. You will have to learn to think not as an individual, but as part of a greater whole, to feel the pulse of all living things, to understand the interconnectedness of all existence. And if I refuse? Naruto asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Then the seal will remain closed, and this knowledge will be lost again to time. Eventually, another may come who is worthy, or perhaps no one ever will. But the elder fixed Naruto with a look that was both compassionate and stern. I do not believe you are the type of person who would make such a choice, even if it were presented to you fairly. Your nature, young man, is to move forward, to embrace challenges, and to seek to help others. A true naturalist is someone who understands that helping others is inseparable from helping the world itself. The next 3 days were spent in intensive research and preparation. Elder Kokodan worked with Kakashi and Tsunade to develop a plan for safely opening and studying the scroll. Naruto, meanwhile, was put through a series of tests designed to measure his natural chakra affinities and his sensitivity to environmental changes. He spent hours meditating, learning to feel the subtle currents of wind within the sealed chamber, to sense the movement of water in the pipes that ran through the building, to feel the slow pulse of life in the plants that decorated the room. It was exhausting in a way that physical training had never been, training not his muscles but his mind, his spirit, his very sense of self. On the 4th day, they decided the seals were stable enough to attempt a careful opening. The scroll was transported to a specialized chamber deep beneath the village, a place constructed specifically for dealing with potentially dangerous jutsu and artifacts. Naruto was brought there, along with Kakashi, Tsunade, Elder Kokodan, and a handful of carefully selected ANBU members who had been read into the situation. The seals are responding favorably to your presence, Kokodan explained as Naruto was positioned in the center of the chamber, with the scroll case placed before him. When you touch the seal and infuse it with your chakra, it should open naturally. But I must warn you, the power contained within is potent. You will feel it, and it will attempt to synchronize with your own chakra. You must remain in control. Do not let the power overwhelm you. What exactly will happen? Naruto asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of his voice. At best? Tsunade answered, her eyes sharp and analytical. You'll gain access to the knowledge and techniques contained in the scroll. At worst, your chakra network could overload, causing anything from minor burns to catastrophic internal damage. That's why we're here. If anything goes wrong, we'll intervene immediately. Not particularly reassuring, but Naruto had faced worse odds in his life. He nodded, took a deep breath, and reached out to touch the scroll case. The moment his fingers made contact, the world exploded into sensation. It started as a gentle warmth, a pleasant sensation like being embraced by sunlight. But it rapidly intensified, growing hotter, more insistent, more demanding. Naruto's chakra network flared to life, glowing beneath his skin like a second set of veins made of pure light. In the darkness of his perception, he could see it, a vast network of energy that stretched beyond his body, connecting him to everything around him. He could feel the earth beneath the chamber, solid and patient, stretching down through layers of stone and mineral to the molten heart of the planet itself. He could feel the water in the air, even the minimal moisture that existed in the sealed chamber, and more abundantly, the water flowing through the village above, through pipes and wells and rain gutters. He could feel the wind, the precious wind that everyone breathed without thinking, moving in currents and eddies through every space, every gap, every opening. And most overwhelming of all, he could feel the life, the countless organisms and plants and animals that inhabited the village and the land surrounding it. Each one a spark of consciousness, each one part of an incomprehensibly vast web of existence that stretched across the entire world. Naruto! Kakashi's voice was distant, muffled, as if coming from somewhere far away. Naruto gasped, his body convulsing as the power continued to pour into him. But it wasn't pain, exactly. It was too much, too vast, too overwhelming, but not painful in the way physical injury was painful. This was the pain of a mind expanded beyond its normal limits, of senses opening to perceive things that human beings were never meant to perceive. The Karama chakra within him stirred, seemed almost to straighten, as if recognizing something ancient and familiar in this new power. The nine-tailed fox, ancient even by the standards of chakra beasts, seemed almost awed. So, the beast's voice echoed in the vastness of Naruto's mind, the old ways have not entirely faded from the world. I remember this. I remember times when the balance of nature was maintained by beings such as this. It has been so long, little host. So very long, Naruto tried to speak, tried to respond, but his voice was lost in the overwhelming tide of sensation. Colors swirled in his vision, colors he didn't have names for, colors that seemed to represent the underlying structure of reality itself. He could see the chakra flowing through the earth, see the energy patterns that govern the weather, see the intricate dance of growth and decay that was the cycle of all living things. And then, suddenly it began to focus. The chaos of sensation seemed to organize itself, to compress and refine. Knowledge flooded into his mind, not as words or images, but as pure understanding. He knew instinctively how to call down rain, how to command the wind, how to make plants grow or wither with a thought. The techniques were there, embedded in his consciousness, as surely as if he'd practiced them for 1,000 years. The scroll case beneath his hands grew hot, then almost unbearably so, and Naruto became dimly aware that it was beginning to burn away, the ancient bronze crumbling into ash as the energy it had contained transferred fully into his body. Pull him out! Tsunade's voice, sharp with command. He felt hands grabbing him, pulling him away from the burning case. But even as they dragged him back, the power continued to flow through him, completing its journey into his chakra network. It integrated with his own energy in a way that felt both foreign and perfectly natural, as if his chakra had been missing this piece all along. With a final surge that made his vision white out completely, the process finished. Naruto collapsed into Kakashi's arms, gasping for breath, his entire body trembling with the aftermath of the overwhelming experience. The next thing Naruto was fully aware of was lying in a hospital bed in the medical wing, with Sakura sitting in a chair beside him, looking like she'd been keeping vigil for quite some time. The light from the window suggested late afternoon, though he had no idea what day it was. How long? He croaked, his throat dry as sand. 3 days, Sakura replied immediately, leaning forward with concern. You've been unconscious for 3 days. We weren't sure if you were going to wake up. She grabbed a water pitcher and poured him a glass with practiced efficiency. How do you feel? Naruto accepted the water gratefully, drinking deeply before attempting to answer. The truth was complicated. Physically, he felt fine, better than fine, actually, as if his body had been cleansed of some invisible toxin. But mentally, emotionally, something fundamental had shifted. I can feel everything, he said, struggling to find words that captured the experience. Even now, I can feel the roots of the plants in the gardens outside. I can feel the humidity in the air, sense where the rain clouds are gathering over the mountains. It's like I've been blind my entire life, and now I can see. That's actually consistent with what Elder Kokodan predicted, Sakura said, consulting a notebook where she'd apparently been taking notes. He explained that naturalists perceive the world differently from normal people. Your sensory awareness is probably hundreds of times more acute than it was before. Is that why I feel like I'm going insane? Naruto asked, laughing somewhat hysterically. There's so much sensory input, Sakura. If I don't actively control it, it all floods in at once and... He stopped abruptly as a strange sensation washed over him. Outside the hospital window, a sudden wind had picked up, bending the branches of the trees with unusual force. Dark clouds began to gather across the sky with almost supernatural speed. Naruto? Sakura's voice had taken on a note of concern. Are you okay? Naruto stared out the window in horror as rain began to fall. Not a gentle rain, but a downpour of absolutely torrential proportions, as if a storm front had materialized out of nowhere. I think I did that. I didn't mean to, but I was getting frustrated and the weather just responded. Sakura rushed to the window, her expression one of shock. The storm that had materialized was clearly not natural. Its intensity was too perfect, its center seemingly focused directly over the hospital. Rain hammered against the windows, wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, Naruto heard the alarm bells that signaled a serious weather emergency. "I need to tell Tsunade," Sakura said urgently, already moving toward the door. "Stay here, and try to calm down. Maybe meditate or something." Alone in the hospital room, Naruto tried desperately to follow her advice. He focused inward, seeking the calm center of his mind where he'd learned to find peace during his early training. But it was infinitely more difficult now, because there was no escaping the sensation of the storm he'd created. He could feel every drop of rain that fell, feel the wind currents he'd unknowingly shaped, feel the fear and confusion of people throughout the village reacting to the sudden weather emergency. The guilt was immediate and crushing. He never meant to cause any harm. The frustration had just been a momentary flash, barely a conscious thought, and yet it had manifested as a disaster weather event. By the time Tsunade arrived, barely 5 minutes later, she found Naruto sitting on the edge of the hospital bed with tears streaming down his face, still fully concentrated on trying to bring the storm back under control. "It's okay," Tsunade said firmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We're bringing Elder Kokodan. Just focus on stability. Try to ease the storm gradually rather than trying to shut it off all at once." It took nearly 2 hours of concentrated effort, with Elder Kokodan guiding him through a series of meditative techniques, before Naruto was able to bring the storm back under control. The rain slowed, then stopped. The wind gradually calmed. By the time the last of the dark clouds dissipated, revealing the late evening sky beyond, Naruto was absolutely exhausted. "This is the critical period," Elder Kokoden explained, settling into the chair that Sakura had vacated. The old man had aged somehow over the past few days. The effort of helping Naruto navigate his new abilities had clearly taken a toll. "Your emotions are directly linked to your power now. Every feeling you experience has the potential to manifest in the world around you. Anger brings storms. Fear brings earthquakes. Joy brings sudden blooms of growth and life. How am I supposed to control that?" Naruto demanded, the frustration creeping back into his voice, and with it, dark clouds beginning to gather once more at the window. He forced himself to take a deep breath, imagining calm water, gentle sunshine, and the threatening weather moved away as if on a schedule. "Meditation," Kokoden said simply. "Practice. Training. The same way you learn to control the nine-tailed fox's chakra. In time, your emotions and your power will learn to coexist. You'll be able to feel anger or fear without immediately manifesting a natural disaster. But that learning will take time." "How much time?" Naruto asked desperately. "Months, perhaps. Years, possibly," the elder replied with brutal honesty. "The good news is that you have proven you can learn such control. The nine tails themselves were far more dangerous when they were sealed within you, and yet you have built an understanding, a partnership even. This will be similar." It wasn't a reassuring answer, but it was honest, and Naruto had always preferred honest answers to comforting lies. Naruto was released from the hospital 3 days later, but only under strict conditions. He was confined to the village, required to spend at least 6 hours per day in intensive training with Elder Kokodan, and subjected to hourly check-ins with either Kakashi or Sakura. It was a level of restriction he hadn't experienced since his early days as a genin, and it chafed against his independent nature, but he understood the necessity. The village had suffered minor damage from the uncontrolled storm he'd created, nothing catastrophic, but enough to demonstrate how dangerous his uncontrolled power could be. The civilian population, already nervous about his existence as the vessel for the nine-tailed fox, became even more anxious now that rumors of his new abilities began to spread. The training with Elder Kokodan was unlike anything Naruto had experienced before. Rather than physical exercises or combat drills, most of the sessions consisted of meditation and what the elder called sympathetic resonance, the practice of syncing his emotional state with specific environmental conditions in a controlled manner. "Feel the anger," Kokoden instructed during one particularly intense afternoon session. They were in a special chamber specifically designed to withstand weather manipulation, with walls reinforced with chakra-absorbing seals. "But do not let it control you. Instead, guide it. Create a wind, but one that serves your purpose rather than destroying indiscriminately. The power itself is neutral, it is your intention that gives the direction. Naruto sat cross-legged on the stone floor, his eyes closed, focusing inward. He'd been practicing this for weeks now, and the technique was slowly becoming more intuitive. He summoned a feeling of righteous anger, specifically, anger at injustice, anger at the way so many people in the world suffered unnecessarily. And as he cultivated that feeling, he directed his chakra outward. The wind that materialized in the chamber was sharp and clean, cutting like a blade, but controlled. It spiraled in a perfect helix, neither dissipating nor growing out of control. It was, Naruto realized, almost beautiful in its precision. Excellent, Kokoden said approvingly. You're beginning to understand. The power is not external, it is an expression of your will. The better you understand yourself, the better control you'll have over your abilities. But for all the training and meditation, nothing could have truly prepared Naruto for the moment when his control was tested against a real emergency. It happened during the 3rd week after the seal had opened. Naruto was actually taking a break from training, having convinced Kakashi that he needed to perform some actual missions to maintain his shinobi credentials and sanity. A simple escort mission, protecting a merchant caravan traveling through the northern trade routes. Everything had been peaceful, almost boring, until bandits attacked just before sunset. There were 8 of them, heavily armed with both blades and explosives, clearly more dangerous than common road raiders. Naruto had dealt with their like countless times before, and he'd been so focused on the combat itself that he hadn't been thinking about his new abilities. The first bandit fell in seconds courtesy of a precise strike that sent him tumbling off his horse. The second and third barely had time to react before Naruto's reinforced fists broke through their inadequate armor. But the fourth one, the apparent leader, was different, faster, stronger, definitely experienced in actual combat. They clashed several times, and with each exchange, the bandit leader grew more confident, more aggressive. On the 5th clash, the bandit leader managed to land a solid blow to Naruto's ribs, one that would have cracked bone on an ordinary person. The pain of it, the shock of impact, triggered something primal in Naruto's chest. Rage flooded through him, not the controlled righteous anger he'd been practicing, but raw, animal fury at the audacity of this man daring to lay hands on him. The effect was immediate. The earth beneath them cracked, a fissure spreading outward with such force that the bandit leader was thrown backward. Trees nearby began to grow at an accelerated rate, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. The wind rose to a shrieking crescendo, pushing both the bandits and their horses to the ground with terrible force. Naruto stood at the center of it all, his eyes blazing with barely contained power, his hair seeming to move of its own accord despite the now calm air. For a single moment, he could see in the faces of the bandit leader and his remaining followers something he'd seen before in countless enemies. That look of primal, existential fear that came from facing something inhuman. And then, remembering Elder Kokoden's teachings, Naruto forced himself to breathe, forced himself to center his emotions, forced himself to accept the anger without being consumed by it. The manifestations of his power slowly faded. The accelerated growth of plants halted, though the trees remained larger than they should be. The wind died. The crack in the earth stopped spreading. The merchant caravan emerged slowly from where they'd taken shelter, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and horror. The bandit leader, seeing that the immediate danger had passed and that he was facing an overwhelmingly powerful opponent, didn't hesitate to retreat. He whistled sharply, gathering his remaining followers, and they fled on horseback with desperate urgency. Naruto stood there, breathing hard, watching them go. His body was fine. The bandit's blow hadn't even caused any lasting pain. But his mind was racing, processing what he'd just allowed to happen. He could have been killed, yes, and he defended himself. But in that moment, he'd done far more than defend. He'd destroyed a forest clearing, cracked the earth, and very nearly caused serious harm to innocent people. The merchant approached cautiously, as if Naruto were a dangerous animal that might strike at any moment. "Thank you," the man said carefully, "for saving us." Naruto couldn't find words. "I'm sorry. I lost control. I could have hurt someone." "But you didn't," the merchant said, a note of reassurance in his voice. "You could have, but you didn't. Whatever power you have, you chose not to use it fully." That says something about your character. It was kind of him to say, but Naruto knew the truth. He'd come very close to losing control. If the fight had lasted even a few moments longer, if his rage had continued to build, the consequences could have been catastrophic. When Naruto returned to the village and reported the incident to Kakashi and Tsunade, the decision was unanimous. His training schedule would need to be even more intensive, and he would not be permitted to go on missions where there was significant risk of combat until he demonstrated far better emotional control. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Naruto accepted it. Because now, in a way he couldn't deny, he understood the magnitude of what he'd become. He had awakened something vast and primal within himself, something that could reshape the world if he let it. And the scariest part? He could feel it slumbering within him still, waiting to be fully unleashed. He could sense the full extent of the power that Elder Kokoden had described, the ability to command weather across entire nations, to make deserts bloom or forests wither, to reshape the very landscape itself. That night, alone in his apartment, Naruto sat by his window and watched the lights of the village twinkle in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Kakashi and Sakura and all his other friends were going about their lives, unaware of just how much had changed when that ancient seal had finally opened. "What have I become?" he whispered to the night air. The wind picked up in response, gentle and soothing, carrying with it the scent of growing things and distant rain. It seemed almost to wrap around him, almost like an answer to his question. Deep within the earth, in chambers sealed so completely that few mortals could even perceive them, ancient consciousness stirred. For centuries uncounted, the repositories of knowledge and power had waited in dormancy, waiting for one worthy enough to carry their burdens and their gifts. Now, for the first time in generations, a seal had opened. And in that opening, the ancient patterns recognized something familiar, not just the return of a lost art, but the awakening of a new age. The world was changing, the careful balance maintained for centuries was shifting. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the way things were meant to be. A figure composed entirely of light, and Will regarded the distant consciousness of the young naturalist with something approaching approval. He had walked this world once, lived and breathed and helped build civilizations. The Sage of Six Paths, creator of ninjutsu itself, had left behind more than just techniques and seals. He had left behind hope, the hope that one day, when darkness threatened to overwhelm the world again, someone would rise up bearing the ancient powers. Whether the young man known as Naruto Uzumaki would prove worthy of that hope remained to be seen. But at least the possibility now existed. The seal had opened. The awakening had begun. The stage was set for the next great chapter of human history. The Hokage Tower hummed with the kind of tension that came from difficult decisions and dangerous unknowns. Naruto sat in the observation chamber adjacent to the main council room, separated from the proceedings by a one-way seal that allowed him to see and hear everything while remaining unseen. It was a courtesy Tsunade had extended to him, the right to witness the discussion about his own fate, if not to participate in it directly. Across the table from where Tsunade sat, Kakashi maintained his characteristic composure, though Naruto could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. Jiraiya, the legendary Sannin, occupied the seat to Tsunade's left, his expression thoughtful as he studied various scrolls laid out before him. The village elders, Koharu Yuditane, Hamura Mitokado, and Inoki, sat rigidly upright, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile. "The facts are simple," Tsunade began, her voice carrying the absolute authority of the Hokage. 3 weeks ago, a sealed repository containing ancient knowledge was discovered and opened by Naruto Uzumaki. As a result of this opening, Naruto has gained access to abilities that we are still struggling to understand and classify. The question before this council is, what do we do about it? "We need to be cautious," Elder Koharu said immediately, her ancient eyes fixed on Tsunade with the intensity of a hawk. "The boy has already demonstrated a dangerous lack of control. That storm he created could have leveled the village. And the incident on the merchant route. He came perilously close to causing a disaster that would have killed innocents. He also saved that merchant caravan from bandits and demonstrated remarkable restraint in an emotionally charged situation," Jiraiya countered, leaning back in his chair with an expression of calm interest. "The boy has proven time and time again that he can learn to master his abilities, no matter how overwhelming they initially seem." I propose we give him a chance. A chance that could cost lives if he loses control again, Elder Hamura said sharply. We should restrict his movements further. Perhaps even place him under permanent watch. His power is too great to allow him freedom of action. Kakashi's hand came down on the table with controlled force, drawing everyone's attention. With respect, Elder Hamura, I must voice my strong disagreement. Naruto has proven himself a loyal shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village countless times over. To imprison him, even nominally, would be a betrayal of that loyalty. Furthermore, his visible eye fixed on the elder with dangerous intensity, such restrictions would likely prove counterproductive. The boy's power is emotionally responsive. Fear and restriction would only make him more volatile. And what do you suggest, Kakashi? Tsunade asked, though Naruto suspected she already knew the answer. Intensive training under proper guidance, Kakashi replied. From what Elder Kokoden has told us, there are techniques and meditation practices that can help Naruto learn to manage his emotional responses and control his manifestations of power. Given time and proper instruction, he could become not a danger to the village, but a tremendous asset. Time and instruction require resources that could be used elsewhere, Elder Inoki pointed out, though his tone was less hostile than the other elders. We are still in a period of recovery from the Fourth Shinobi War. The village's reserves are stretched thin. It was Jiraiya who answered that concern, pulling out a particular scroll from the pile before him. I've been researching the nature of these ancient abilities, and I believe I may have found a solution. There are references in the oldest texts to a community of monks and hermits who maintain sanctuaries dedicated to the study of natural forces. One of these communities still exists, the Temple of Green Harmony in the mountains to the east. If we can negotiate with the monks there to take on Naruto's training, the burden on the village's resources would be minimal, while the boy would receive training from those most qualified to teach him. And you believe the monks would accept such a student? Tsunade asked. I believe, Jiraiya said with the confidence of someone who had traveled extensively across the shinobi world, that they would consider it a gift. The art of naturalism has become so rare that any opportunity to pass on the knowledge would be eagerly seized upon. The discussion continued for another hour, but Naruto could sense that the decision was already made. By the time the council meeting concluded, it was settled. Elder Kokodan would continue to provide preliminary instruction and emotional stabilization training, but within 2 weeks, Naruto would be sent to the Temple of Green Harmony for intensive study under whatever masters the monks could provide. When Naruto was called into the main chamber after the elders had departed, Tsunade looked at him with an expression that mixed concern with something that might have been pride. Your training is going to intensify significantly, she said without preamble. We've arranged for you to study at an ancient temple in the eastern mountains. The monks there specialize in understanding and controlling natural forces. Elder Kokodan will accompany you and serve as your primary liaison with the village. For how long? Naruto asked, though he'd already heard enough of the discussion to know the answer wouldn't be short. As long as it takes, Kakashi said, moving to stand beside Tsunade's desk. Months, likely. Possibly longer. You need to learn true mastery of this power, Naruto. For your own sake and for the village's. Naruto nodded, accepting the decision with the grace that years of training had instilled in him. When do we leave? In 14 days, Tsunade replied. That gives you 2 weeks to prepare, say your goodbyes, and complete any outstanding business here in the village. Use the time wisely. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. There were practical preparations to make, supplies to gather, travel arrangements to finalize, and 1,000 small details that needed attention. But more importantly, there were people to see. Naruto found Sakura in the hospital, where she was working a late shift. She was examining a patient's chakra pathways when he arrived, but she finished quickly and guided him to a quiet corner where they could talk privately. I heard, Sakura said, and there was no judgment in her voice, only concern and affection. Kakashi filled me in on the council's decision. Are you okay with going? I don't feel like I have much choice, Naruto admitted, sitting down on one of the medical beds. But I know it's necessary. I can't risk hurting people because I lose control. The power is too big, Sakura. Some days I wake up and I can feel it thrumming through my whole body, like an ocean trying to fit inside a teacup. Sakura's expression softened, and she sat down beside him. You'll master it. You always do. Remember when you first started learning to control the Nine-Tails chakra? Everyone thought it was impossible, but you did it. This is just the next step in that same journey. But the Nine-Tails was something I had to control because it was inside me, Naruto said quietly. This is different. This power is in me now. It's not separate. It's part of who I am. I can't just contain it or suppress it. I have to learn to be it while remaining myself. Then that's what you'll learn, Sakura said with certainty. She reached out and squeezed his hand. And when you come back, you'll be even stronger than before. But Naruto? She waited until he looked at her. Please promise me you'll take this seriously. No running off on side quests. No getting distracted. Focus on your training completely. I promise, Naruto said, and meant it. His meeting with Hinata was more emotionally complicated. He found her in the Hyuga training grounds, practicing her gentle fist technique against the wooden dummy. She stopped immediately when she sensed his presence, turning to greet him with the shy smile that he'd come to cherish over the years. They talked for a long time, sitting beneath one of the old cherry trees that grew in the corner of the training ground. Naruto explained the situation, the training, the timeline. Hinata listened without interrupting, her pale eyes focused entirely on his face as if she was trying to memorize every detail. I will be here when you return, she said simply, with the absolute certainty of someone who had been waiting for Naruto for most of her life and had no intention of stopping now. It could be months, Naruto warned. A lot could change in that time. For you, perhaps, Hinata said, her voice soft but steady. But not for me. Not for this. She indicated the connection between them with a gesture that encompassed far more than mere words could express. It was perhaps the most romantic thing that had ever happened to Naruto, and yet it required no grand gestures or elaborate declarations. It was simply the truth of Hinata's feelings, stated plainly and without doubt. Naruto's final meeting before his departure was with Kakashi, who asked to see him the evening before they were scheduled to leave. They met on the roof of the Hokage Tower, looking out over the sleeping village below. The lights twinkled like stars brought down to earth, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out into the night. I wanted to give you something, Kakashi said, producing a small scroll from his pocket. I wrote this for you. Don't open it until you've been training for at least a month. Naruto accepted the scroll cautiously. What is it? Advice, Kakashi said. From someone who has also struggled with overwhelming power and the responsibility it brings. I think you'll find it relevant to what you're about to face. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, Naruto still holding the scroll, not quite ready to put it away. Finally, Naruto asked the question that had been bothering him. Do you think I can do this? Do you think I can really master this power? Kakashi was silent for a long moment, his visible eye distant. When he finally answered, his voice carried absolute conviction. I know you can. Because I've watched you overcome impossible odds your entire life. You have a gift, Naruto, not just for jutsu or combat, but for transformation. You take the worst circumstances and find a way to grow beyond them. This will be no different. You'll struggle, you'll face moments where you want to give up, you'll doubt yourself. But in the end, you'll emerge stronger than ever before. The morning of their departure dawned clear and bright, with no clouds in the sky. Naruto wondered if that was a coincidence, or if his emotional state was affecting the weather even now. It wouldn't surprise him, given what he'd learned about the connection between his feelings and environmental manifestations. Elder Kokoden met him at the village gates, along with 2 monks from the Temple of Green Harmony who had come to escort them. They were both younger than Naruto would have expected. The female monk, who introduced herself as Sister May, appeared to be in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a knowing smile. The male monk, Brother Tarun, was perhaps 5 years older, with the calm demeanor of someone who had made peace with the world. The journey will take 3 days, Elder Kokoden explained as they began walking toward the forest. We'll make camp each night along the way. Sister May and Brother Tarun will use the travel time to assess your current level of training. Assessment? Naruto asked, falling into step beside the old hermit. We need to understand the scope of your abilities and your limitations before we can develop an effective training regimen, Sister May said, her voice surprisingly warm. The temple maintains records of all known naturalists from the past 1,000 years. We can compare your abilities to historical precedents and determine what kind of instruction will be most beneficial. The first day of travel was deceptively peaceful. They walked through the forest paths, and as they did, Naruto became increasingly aware of everything around him. He could feel the vast network of roots beneath the forest floor, the slow pulse of sap moving through the trees, the quick fluttering heartbeats of countless small animals moving through the underbrush. It was almost meditative, this constant sensory input, and he found himself falling into a state of calm focus that reminded him of the meditation techniques Elder Kokoden had been teaching him. That evening, as they set up camp in a clearing beside a small stream, Brother Tarun approached Naruto with a calm expression. "We'd like to conduct our first assessment," the monk said. "Nothing too strenuous. We simply want to see what you can do." They led Naruto to a nearby area that had been cleared of trees, a flat expanse of earth perhaps 50 meters across. Sister May gestured for him to stand in the center. "Create rain," she said simply. Naruto closed his eyes, reaching inward for the meditation state he'd been practicing. He focused on his emotions, not sadness, which was what rain typically represented, but something deeper. He thought about the cycles of nature, about the necessity of water for all living things, about the pure, fundamental truth of water returning to the earth. The response was almost immediate. Within seconds, clouds began to gather overhead, drawing moisture from the air itself. Naruto guided the process carefully, mindful of his training, ensuring that the manifestation remained gentle and controlled. A light rain began to fall, soft and warm, covering the entire clearing in a gentle mist. "Good," Sister May said approvingly. "Now stop it." Naruto eased out of the meditative state, and the clouds dispersed just as quickly as they had formed. The rain ceased, and within moments, the sky was clear again, as if it had never been cloudy at all. "Your emotional control is stronger than I expected," Brother Tarun said, studying Naruto thoughtfully. "Most new naturalists struggle for months before achieving that level of precision. How long have you been training?" 3 weeks, Naruto replied. "Elder Kokoden has been teaching me meditation techniques to help manage the emotional responses." "And the nine-tailed fox," Sister May added, her eyes gleaming with understanding. "That connection may actually be helping you. The Nine Tails is an ancient being, aware of the old ways. Its presence in your chakra system might be providing intuitive guidance." "That's actually what Nine Tails suggested," Naruto admitted. "That it remembers times before, when naturalists were common." "Fascinating," Brother Tarun said, exchanging a look with Sister May. "This changes some of our assumptions about your training. Come, we have more tests to conduct." Over the next several hours, they put Naruto through a series of assessments designed to measure his control and power. He was asked to manipulate wind with increasing precision, creating specific patterns, varying the force and direction, maintaining multiple separate wind currents simultaneously. He demonstrated his ability to affect vegetation, causing plants to grow rapidly and then revert to their natural state. He showed them what he could do with Earth, creating small tremors and localized geological shifts. By the time they finished, as darkness was settling over the forest, Naruto was absolutely exhausted. It was a different kind of exhaustion than physical training produced, not muscular fatigue, but mental and spiritual tiredness, as if some core part of him had been wrung out like a wet cloth. "You have tremendous raw power," Elder Kokoden said as they sat around the campfire that evening. "More than most naturalists would possess even after years of training. But your control is still rough. You're learning to manage the emotional triggers, but you haven't yet achieved true harmony with the natural forces you're manipulating." "What's the difference?" Naruto asked, poking at the fire with a stick. "Control is about suppression," Sister May explained. "It's about forcing your will onto nature and demanding that it obey. But harmony is about cooperation. It's about understanding that you and nature are not separate. You are both part of the same fundamental system. When you achieve true harmony, your abilities will feel less like commanding external forces and more like moving your own limbs. The power will flow through you as naturally as breathing." "That sounds hard," Naruto said, which elicited a soft laugh from Brother Tarun. "It's the hardest thing you'll ever learn," the monk confirmed. "But also the most rewarding. Once you achieve it, the things you'll be capable of will surpass your current imagination." They arrived at the Temple of Green Harmony on the afternoon of the third day, and Naruto's first impression was of a place that seemed to have grown organically from the landscape rather than being built upon it. The buildings, and there were many of them, spread across a vast clearing in the mountains, were constructed from wood and stone in ways that seemed to flow with the natural contours of the land. Gardens of impossible beauty surrounded the buildings, with plant life in every conceivable variety flourishing in carefully maintained spaces. But it was the central meditation hall that captured Naruto's attention most strongly. At the heart of the temple complex stood a massive tree, easily 200 feet tall, with a trunk so vast that 20 men holding hands couldn't encircle it. The tree was ancient. Naruto could feel the age radiating from it like heat from a fire, and its presence was almost overwhelming in its vitality. The heart tree, Elder Kokoden said, noticing Naruto's fixation. It's been the spiritual center of this temple for over 3,000 years. Naturalists are naturally drawn to it. You'll feel that connection very strongly during your time here. The head abbot of the temple, a man named Zenrei who appeared to be in his 70s but moved with the suppleness of someone half his age, personally greeted them in the main hall. He was shorter than Naruto had expected, with kind eyes and a smile that suggested he found genuine amusement in the world around him. "Welcome, young naturalist," Zenrei said, clasping his hands in greeting. "Word travels fast, even to our remote sanctuary. The seal has opened again, and one worthy has been found. This is a momentous occasion for us." He gestured for one of the temple servants to come forward. "You'll be shown to your quarters. Rest today and tomorrow. Your formal training begins the day after." Naruto's quarters turned out to be a small, sparse but clean room on the eastern side of the temple complex. It had a single window that looked out over the gardens, and a door that opened onto a wooden veranda. There was a meditation cushion, a simple bed, and a writing desk, nothing more. It was exactly the kind of minimalist space that a training temple would provide. He spent the evening exploring the temple grounds, getting a sense of its layout and the rhythm of life within its walls. The monks and nuns who lived here moved with a quiet purpose, performing chores and attending to the various gardens with a level of care that suggested they understood each plant and flower as an individual entity deserving of respect. In the Heart Tree's meditation hall, he found dozens of naturalists, or at least, he assumed they must be, because they had the same quality of constant sensory awareness that he'd begun to develop. Some were young, perhaps teenagers barely older than Naruto himself. Others were older, their faces lined with years of practice and experience. They meditated in silence around the massive trunk, and as Naruto entered, several of them opened their eyes to regard him with expressions of curiosity and welcome. "First day?" a young woman with dark hair asked, rising from her meditation position to approach him. "I'm Lin. I've been training here for about 6 months. Naruto," he replied, shaking her offered hand. "Yes, this is my first day. Though I've been training for about 3 weeks before coming here." 3 weeks? Lin's eyes widened. "And they already sent you to the temple? That's unusual. Most people don't come here until they've been training for at least 6 months. What kind of power level are you at?" Over the next hour, Naruto found himself surrounded by other trainee naturalists, all curious about this newcomer who had apparently impressed the temple enough to be admitted so quickly. He did his best to answer their questions, though he was increasingly aware that he didn't actually know that much about his own abilities. He could do things, manipulate weather, affect plant growth, create localized geological shifts, but he didn't have a deep understanding of why he could do these things or how his abilities compared to more experienced naturalists. That night, lying in bed in his small room, listening to the wind moving through the temple gardens, Naruto felt the weight of what lay ahead of him. This was different from any training he'd undergone before. With physical combat training or even chakra control, there were objective measurements of success. You could see if you were getting stronger, faster, more precise. But this was about fundamentally changing how he perceived and interacted with the world. The next morning, Elder Kokoden appeared at his door before sunrise. "Come," the old hermit said. "The abbot wants to see you, and there's something you need to experience." He led Naruto back to the Heart Tree's meditation hall. In the early morning light, with the sun just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, the massive tree seemed to glow with inner light. Abbot Zenrei stood before its trunk, his eyes closed, his hands pressed against the ancient bark. "Place your hands here," the abbot said, not opening his eyes. Naruto did as instructed, pressing his palms against the rough surface of the trunk. The moment he made contact, his mind exploded with sensation. He could feel the tree's age, its vast accumulation of memories spanning millennia. He could sense the countless lives it had sheltered, insects, birds, small mammals living in its branches. He could feel the network of roots extending deep into the earth, drawing up water and minerals from the soil. And most overwhelming of all, he could feel the tree's presence, not quite consciousness in the way animals possessed it, but something vast and patient and utterly alien to human understanding. "This is what you're learning to hear," Zenrei said, his voice distant and dreamy. Not the small voice of individual plants or weather patterns, but the vast, fundamental voice of nature itself. The tree has been alive for 3,000 years. It has witnessed civilizations rise and fall. It has endured storms and droughts, wars and peace. And it continues to grow, to live, to serve its purpose without question or complaint. Naruto tried to pull his hands away, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the experience, but Zenrei's voice stopped him. "Stay with it," the abbot commanded gently. "Feel it completely. Let it know you. Let it understand that you are not its master, but its partner." Time became meaningless. Naruto couldn't say whether he was in contact with the tree for minutes or hours. But gradually, his panic faded. The overwhelming sensation began to organize itself, to make a kind of sense that transcended normal language. He began to understand, not intellectually but intuitively, that the tree's slow thoughts were not inferior to human consciousness. They were simply different, operating on a different timescale, with different values and priorities. When he finally removed his hands, the sun was high in the sky. His arms felt weak, as if they'd been supporting his entire body weight. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool air of the meditation hall. "This," Abbot Zenrei said, opening his own eyes and looking at Naruto with an expression of profound compassion, "is what you will be learning. Not to command, but to listen. Not to control, but to cooperate. Not to see yourself as separate from nature, but to understand that you are nature, observing itself." Naruto's training at the Temple of Green Harmony fell into a pattern that was both grueling and strangely meditative. Each day began before dawn, with 2 hours of meditation in contact with the heart tree. This was followed by breakfast, then 4 hours of practical training under Sister May's instruction. The practical training focused on precision and intentionality. Rather than the broad, overwhelming displays of power that Naruto had initially been capable of, Sister May taught him to manipulate natural forces with surgical precision. She had him create specific cloud formations, maintain exact wind speeds, cause plants to grow in specific patterns. The work was meticulous and mentally exhausting, but it was also revealing. "You see," Sister May explained one afternoon as they worked in a garden that had been specially prepared for training, "when you try to display overwhelming power, you're not actually exercising control, you're just releasing force. Any child can do that. But true mastery comes from understanding the principles underlying natural phenomena and manipulating them at a fundamental level." She had Naruto demonstrate his understanding by causing a single raindrop to fall from the sky and land precisely on a specific leaf of a nearby plant, not the easiest or most visible leaf, but a particular one selected randomly from among hundreds of possibilities. It took him 3 hours and left him utterly exhausted, but when the raindrop finally landed exactly where Sister May had indicated, there was a sense of achievement that transcended any victory he'd achieved in combat. Afternoons were spent with Brother Tarun, learning the theoretical and spiritual aspects of naturalism. These sessions involved study of ancient texts, discussion of historical naturalists and their accomplishments, and exploration of the philosophical underpinnings of the entire practice. The fundamental principle of naturalism, Brother Tarun explained during one such session, is balance. Not balance in the sense of inactivity or neutral positions, but balance in the sense of dynamic equilibrium. A river is in constant motion, yet it maintains its channel. A forest perpetually grows and dies, yet maintains its essential character. A person changes continuously throughout their life, yet maintains their fundamental identity. This is the balance we seek, change and stability existing together. But how does that apply to what I'm learning? Naruto asked, genuinely confused. Your power is immense, Brother Tarun said. And because it is immense, you have the potential to cause tremendous harm. A naturalist with your level of power who lacks understanding of balance could reshape the world according to their individual whim, destroying everything that existed before. This is why emotional control and spiritual development are so important. They are not limitations on your power, but rather the foundation that allows you to wield it responsibly. Evenings were Naruto's own time, though Sister May and Brother Tarun encouraged him to use it for additional meditation or study. Naruto usually spent at least part of the evening in the meditation hall, often practicing with other trainees. Lin, the young woman who had first greeted him, became a close friend. She had a gift for explaining complex concepts in simple terms, and seemed genuinely interested in helping Naruto understand his abilities better. I'm only a minor-level naturalist, Lin told him one evening as they sat together in the gardens. But even I can tell you're something special. The things you're learning in weeks would take most people months. It's like you have this intuitive understanding that the rest of us have to work toward intellectually. Maybe it's because of the 9 tails, Naruto said. Elder Kokoden thinks the connection is helping. That 9 tails remembers the old ways. Have you tried asking it? Lin asked, with the innocent curiosity of someone who had never had to live with an ancient chakra beast sharing their body. Naruto actually laughed at that. I should probably try that more often. Most of the time I'm just trying to manage the constant barrage of sensory information. Here's a tip, Lin said, moving closer conspiratorially. Don't manage it. Instead of trying to suppress all the sensory input and control which stimuli you're aware of, try opening yourself completely to it. Accept all of it at once. It sounds worse, but actually it's easier on your mind. When you're trying to selectively filter what you perceive, that takes active effort. But if you just let everything in, there's a point where it all blends together into background sensation. Like white noise, Naruto took that advice seriously. That night in his meditation session, instead of trying to carefully control which environmental stimuli he was aware of, he opened himself completely to all of it. At first it was chaotic, an overwhelming flood of sensation that made him want to scream. But Lin was right. As he forced himself to remain open and receptive, gradually the chaos began to organize itself. Individual sensations blended together into a unified awareness of the entire ecosystem around him. The temple, the gardens, the forest beyond, all of it existing as a single interconnected system of which he was merely one small part. The experience was transcendent and terrifying in equal measure. For the first time, Naruto genuinely understood what the monks meant when they spoke of achieving harmony with nature. It wasn't about control at all. It was about surrendering the illusion of separation and understanding that you were never separate to begin with. When he reported this breakthrough to Abbot Senrei, the old man's expression was one of profound approval. You have achieved what takes most naturalists months to grasp, the abbot said. The principle of integrated awareness. From this point forward, your training will accelerate significantly. You're no longer learning to force nature to obey you. Now you're learning to work with nature as a partner. It was 6 weeks into Naruto's training when the crisis came. A messenger arrived at the temple bearing urgent news from the Hidden Leaf village. There had been a major earthquake, not a natural one, but caused by a rogue shinobi who had somehow obtained forbidden jutsu that allowed them to manipulate geological forces. The earthquake had been devastating. Multiple buildings had collapsed, and while the death toll was thankfully limited thanks to quick action by the village's trained ninja, there were hundreds injured and significant property damage. Worse, the rogue shinobi had escaped, and intelligence suggested they were heading toward other populated areas. Naruto read the message with growing horror. Names and faces from his life in the village were listed as injured. Sakura had been in the hospital when the earthquake struck. She was safe, but dealing with an influx of trauma cases. Kakashi had been out on a mission when it happened, but he was being reassigned to help with recovery efforts. The academy had collapsed partially, and several students had been trapped until rescue efforts freed them. You should return, Elder Kokoden said gently when he found Naruto standing in the gardens, staring at the message as if the words might change if he looked at them long enough. Your village needs you. I'm not ready, Naruto said immediately. I haven't completed my training. If I go back now, I'll revert to the emotional instability I was dealing with before. The stress of the emergency could cause me to lose control completely. Then learn to be ready, Abbot Zenrei said, appearing beside them as if he'd materialized from the air itself. A true naturalist understands that training is never truly complete. Life itself is the ultimate teacher. Go to your village. Help those who need helping. And continue your training in the midst of action rather than in the safety of our sanctuary. But I need more time, Naruto protested. You need to understand, the abbot interrupted, his voice gentle but firm, that the real test of your abilities will not come in meditation halls or practice gardens. It will come when you're facing actual situations where lives depend on your choices and your control. You can continue studying with us when you return, but for now, your village calls you. Sister May and Brother Tarun prepared him for departure. They gave him several scrolls containing techniques he hadn't yet fully mastered, but which they assured him would become accessible to him through continued practice. They also gave him the most important gift, a small sapling from the heart tree itself, grown from one of the massive tree's seeds. Keep this alive, and it will help you maintain your connection to what you've learned here, Sister May said, placing the delicate young tree in Naruto's careful hands. The heart tree is ancient, but even ancient things start as seeds. This sapling is a seed of hope for the future. As it grows, so too will your mastery. The journey back to the village took 2 days rather than 3, as Naruto pushed the pace mercilessly. Elder Kokodan matched his speed without complaint, his ancient frame moving with surprising vigor. By the time they arrived at the village gates, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed almost ominous given the damage evident in the collapsed buildings visible from the gates. Kakashi was waiting for them, along with Sakura and Hinata. The reunion was brief but intense, with no time for lengthy explanations or emotional reconnection. There was work to be done. The rogue shinobi is still in the region, Kakashi reported as they moved through the damaged streets toward the Hokage Tower. We have teams searching for them, but they're skilled at concealment. If we could locate them. He trailed off, but the implication was clear. If they could find the shinobi, Naruto's abilities would make capturing them far easier. I can do that, Naruto said, more confident than he felt. I can sense geological disturbances. If they use their jutsu again, I'll feel it. It took everything Naruto had learned at the temple, all the meditation, all the work on emotional control, all the practice with integrated awareness, to function over the next 72 hours. They searched for the rogue shinobi through the night and the following day, with Naruto using his expanded senses to track even the faintest disturbances in the earth. The confrontation, when it came, was brief but intense. The rogue shinobi, a woman with the ability to create localized earthquakes and earth tremors, cornered Naruto and Kakashi in a canyon. What could have been a catastrophic battle was averted by Naruto's incredible control. Instead of matching the shinobi's destructive power with equal force, Naruto used his understanding of geological principles to neutralize the threat. He created a stable foundation beneath the earth that prevented her jutsu from creating the cascading collapses she'd been attempting. He manipulated the ground beneath her feet, never with the intent to harm, but simply to restrict her movement options until Kakashi could move in and subdue her. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes, and when it was over, the rogue shinobi was in custody, and the area had suffered minimal additional damage. It was only after Kakashi had congratulated him, and the shinobi was being transported to the ANBU detention cells that Naruto realized something profound. He had fought a difficult battle without losing control even once. Even when facing direct threats, when his life was in danger, he had maintained the emotional equilibrium that the temple had taught him to achieve. The training had worked. The meditation, the precision exercises, the hours of practice, it had all created something fundamental within him. He was no longer a shinobi trying to control an overwhelming power. He was beginning to become what the abbot had described, a true naturalist capable of wielding tremendous force while maintaining inner balance and calm. As the days progressed and the village continued its recovery efforts, Naruto found himself using his abilities in ways he never imagined before his training. He helped repair damaged buildings by stabilizing the earth beneath them. He cleared debris fields by carefully manipulating the stones and soil. He even helped restore the partially collapsed academy by having specific areas grow back, using controlled plant growth to create temporary supports while structural repairs were made. The village's perception of him began to shift as well. Where once people had feared him, or been neutral about his presence, now there was a growing sense of gratitude. He was using his power not to dominate or control, but to help and heal. One evening, as Naruto stood looking at the nearly restored academy, Tsunade appeared beside him. "Good work," the Hokage said simply. "How much of this was your training at the temple?" "More than I'd have expected," Naruto admitted. 3 months ago, I would have just created overwhelming force to clear the rubble. Someone probably would have gotten hurt. Now I can do it precisely, carefully, with a level of control that keeps everyone safe. "Then your training has been worthwhile," Tsunade said. "But I suspect it's far from over. Abbot Senrei sent me a message. He says you're welcome back whenever you wish to continue your studies. He also says you're no longer a student in the traditional sense. You've graduated to being a student of life itself." News of Naruto's awakened abilities spread through the shinobi world faster than anyone in the Hidden Leaf village had anticipated. Within 2 weeks of the rogue shinobi incident, official diplomatic envoys from the Sand Village, the Mist Village, and the Cloud Village had arrived at the gates, requesting formal audiences with Naruto and the village leadership. Tsunade called an emergency council meeting that included Naruto, Kakashi, Jiraiya, Elder Kokodan, and representatives from each of the visiting nations. The tension in the room was palpable, electric with the kind of anxiety that came from uncertain political situations and the potential for conflict. The Sand Village's envoy, a sharp-featured woman named Magistrate Harada, was the first to speak. "The Hidden Sand Village has long maintained peaceful relations with the Hidden Leaf Village," she began, her tone cordial but careful. "However, recent developments have raised some concerns. We understand that the young man known as Naruto Uzumaki has gained control over weather patterns and geological forces. As the Sand Village exists in an arid region where weather control directly impacts our survival, we must inquire, what are the intentions behind developing such power? Is this a prelude to some form of dominance over other nations?" Before Tsunade could respond, the Mist Village's representative, a severe-looking man with scarred features named Commander Korai, interjected. "The concern is not limited to environmental manipulation. A shinobi with the power to control weather could devastate any military force. Combined with the nine-tailed fox sealed within him, this individual represents a potential threat to the stability of all 5 great nations. That is precisely why we're conducting this meeting transparently," Kakashi said, his voice steady and authoritative. "Naruto has not sought this power. It was granted to him through forces beyond anyone's control. And he has demonstrated remarkable restraint and responsibility in his use of these abilities." "Demonstrated to whom?" The Cloud Village's envoy, a tall woman with intense eyes named Captain Seiya, asked. "We have only the Hidden Leaf Village's assurances. We have not witnessed his control ourselves. I propose a demonstration, under neutral observation, of course, to determine the actual extent of his power and verify the claims of control." Naruto felt the weight of all eyes turning toward him. This was clearly a moment where the decision he made would have far-reaching consequences. He took a breath, centering himself in the way he'd learned at the temple, and spoke. "I'm willing to demonstrate my abilities," he said clearly. "But I want to be clear about something first. I'm not just demonstrating power. I'm demonstrating responsibility. The ability to cause harm means nothing if you don't also demonstrate the ability to restrain that harm when necessary." Jiraiya smiled at that, a genuine, approving expression. "The boy speaks with wisdom. I propose the demonstration take place in the Valley of Echoes, 3 days from now. That location is neutral territory, and there's sufficient space for any display without threatening populated areas." The Valley of Echoes was exactly as Naruto had heard it described, a vast, natural amphitheater of stone and earth, surrounded by high cliffs that created acoustic properties that had given the location its name. Hundreds of observers had gathered for the demonstration, including official representatives from all 5 great nations, numerous journalists, and various high-ranking shinobi from different villages. Naruto had not slept the night before. Instead, he'd spent it meditating with Elder Kokodan, preparing himself mentally and spiritually for what was to come. The old hermit had given him specific guidance. "Remember what you learned at the temple," Kokodan had said. "Show them not just your power, but your understanding. Every action you take should demonstrate that you comprehend the consequences of what you're doing. You're not just performing, you're teaching. As dawn broke over the valley, Naruto was positioned in the center of the amphitheater, while observers took positions on the surrounding slopes. Tsunade and a panel of neutral judges sat in a specially prepared observation area, prepared to evaluate the demonstration. Your first task, Tsunade called out, her voice carrying easily through the valley, is to demonstrate weather manipulation. Specifically, create rain on the western slope while keeping the eastern slope completely dry. It was a challenging test, requiring Naruto to create atmospheric conditions that diverged in opposite directions simultaneously. He centered himself, feeling the moisture in the air, the pressure systems surrounding the valley, the fundamental currents of wind and water vapor that gave rise to weather. Instead of creating the effect immediately, Naruto first explained what he was about to do, his voice magically amplified by a seal so that all observers could hear. Weather is not created by simple force, he said. It emerges from the interaction of multiple systems, temperature gradients, humidity levels, pressure differentials, and rotational forces. What I'm about to do is adjust these underlying systems on one side of the valley while maintaining equilibrium on the other side. Then he acted. His hands moved in a slow, deliberate pattern, not quite hand seals, but something more subtle, a kind of physical manifestation of his mental intent. The sky above the western slope began to darken, moisture gathering and condensing into visible cloud formations. Rain began to fall there, gentle but persistent. Simultaneously, over the eastern slope, the air remained clear and dry, the skies staying blue despite the weather systems that were active just meters away. The observation area erupted in whispers. This level of precision was beyond what most people had expected from even the reports they'd heard. Excellent, Tsunade said, making a note. Your next task, cause rapid plant growth in the northern section of the valley, but only specific plant species, grasses and flowering plants, no trees. The growth should be rapid but not uncontrolled. This task required different skills, an understanding of botanical genetics, the ability to stimulate growth without causing damage to the plants themselves, and the precision to affect only certain species while leaving others untouched. Naruto began with his hands pressed against the earth, feeling the living things beneath the soil. He identified the dormant seeds scattered through the dirt, seeds of grasses and flowers that had germinated the previous spring and lay dormant waiting for better conditions. He nudged those conditions artificially. Warmth, moisture, nutrients, light, all the elements that triggered growth. The response was dramatic but controlled. Grasses shot up from the ground, flowers bloomed in fast motion, creating a carpet of color that spread across the northern section in the span of minutes. Trees nearby remained unaffected, their slower growth patterns undisturbed. When Naruto withdrew his influence, the growth halted immediately, leaving a spectacular meadow in what had been barren stone only minutes before. The third test was the most dramatic, geological manipulation. Create a valley within this valley, Tsunade instructed. A depression no less than 10 meters deep, at least 50 meters in length, and 100 meters in width. The creation should be structurally sound and cause no damage to the surrounding observers or to the natural support structures of the surrounding cliffs. This was a task that required understanding geology at a fundamental level. Naruto couldn't simply make the earth disappear. He had to understand the stress patterns in the rock, the load-bearing structures, the way the earth was layered beneath the surface. He had to remove material in a way that didn't compromise the integrity of the surrounding formations. He moved to the center of the valley and placed both hands on the ground. This time, he didn't perform for the observers. Instead, he went into a deep meditative state, feeling through the earth itself, understanding its structure as intimately as if it were his own body. The response was gradual but inexorable. The ground beneath his hands began to sink. But it wasn't a sudden collapse, it was a controlled subsidence, the earth moving in organized patterns. Rock formations shifted, settling into new positions that maintained structural integrity even as space was created below. Soil and stone were displaced, not scattered chaotically, but arranged in a way that created stable walls for the newly formed depression. Over the course of 20 minutes, a perfect valley took shape. 10 meters deep, exactly as requested, with smooth slopes and a flat bottom. The observers, who had been watching nervously for any sign of instability, gradually relaxed as it became clear that Naruto wasn't just creating a spectacular display. He was doing it with geological precision. When he finished and withdrew his hands, the new valley remained perfectly stable. Not a single loose rock fell from the walls. The surrounding cliffs showed no signs of stress or damage. The silence that followed was profound. Then, gradually, observers began to applaud. Even the more skeptical representatives seemed to be grudgingly impressed. "Your final task," Tsunade said, and there was a note of approval in her voice, "is to reverse all your changes. Return the valley to its original state. This will demonstrate your ability to not just create, but to restore." This was perhaps the most difficult task of all. Naruto had to undo the changes he'd made without creating new environmental damage. The newly grown meadow had to be encouraged to return to dormancy without killing the plants. The new valley had to be filled in without creating geological instability. The moisture patterns had to be reset to their natural state. He began with the geology, carefully repositioning the stone and earth that had been displaced, working layer by layer to restore the valley floor to its original elevation. It was meticulous, exhausting work that required complete mental focus. Then he addressed the vegetation, gradually reducing the growth stimulus he'd provided, encouraging the rapidly grown plants to return to their natural dormancy. Finally, he adjusted the moisture patterns in the air, dispersing the clouds and allowing the natural atmospheric conditions to reassert themselves. By the time he finished, 2 hours had passed and Naruto was absolutely exhausted. But the valley was restored to its original state, with only subtle signs remaining that anything had been altered at all. Tsunade rose to her feet, and the observation area erupted into applause. Even Commander Korai and Magistrate Harada seemed impressed, though they maintained their diplomatic composure. "The demonstration is concluded," Tsunade announced. "Naruto Uzumaki has demonstrated not only tremendous power, but also remarkable precision and control. He has shown an understanding of the systems he's manipulating and a commitment to responsibility in their use. I believe this should dispel any concerns about his intentions or his capabilities." The days following the demonstration were filled with diplomatic meetings, formal negotiations, and endless discussions about the implications of Naruto's abilities for the balance of power between the nations. Naruto found himself increasingly involved in high-level political discussions that were far outside his comfort zone. Tsunade, recognizing his discomfort, began to school him in the political realities of their world. "Whether you like it or not," the Hokage explained during one of their private meetings, "you are now a strategic asset of significant importance. The Sand Village will want to negotiate favorable weather patterns. The Mist Village will be concerned about you potentially affecting ocean currents. The Cloud Village will worry about your ability to influence storm systems. And all of them will be hoping to either secure your loyalty, or at least ensure that you remain neutral in future conflicts." "That's a lot of pressure," Naruto said, rubbing his temples. "It is," Tsunade agreed. "Which is why we need to establish some clear principles that will guide your use of power. These principles need to be documented and formally agreed upon by all the nations. That way, if there are disputes in the future, there's a framework for resolution." The framework that eventually emerged, after weeks of negotiation, became known as the Accord of Balance. The key provisions stated that, 1. Naruto would not use his weather manipulation abilities to give military advantage to any particular nation. 2. He would not interfere with the territorial disputes or conflicts between nations, unless directly authorized to do so by a formal request from the Hidden Leaf Village leadership. 3. He could, with authorization from Tsunade and consultation with Elder Kokodan, use his abilities for humanitarian purposes, assisting in natural disaster relief, helping with irrigation in drought-stricken areas, and similar beneficial applications. 4. Naruto would remain stationed in the Hidden Leaf Village and would be available for diplomatic consultation regarding environmental matters affecting the other nations. The agreement was signed by representatives of all 5 great nations and formalized with official seals. It was a relief to Naruto in many ways. It established clear boundaries and expectations that protected him from some of the more concerning political demands that had been implied during the negotiation process. But it also highlighted something that had been growing increasingly difficult for Naruto to ignore. His power could fundamentally affect the livelihoods of entire nations, and this gave him a level of responsibility that transcended his personal comfort or preferences. 3 months after the Accord of Balance was signed, Naruto was called upon to use his abilities in a way that demonstrated the true potential of a naturalist, not for warfare or intimidation, but for helping people and improving lives. The Sand Village sent an urgent request. A severe drought was threatening their crops and water supplies. If the situation continued for another month, it could lead to widespread famine. They were requesting Naruto's assistance in bringing rain to their agricultural regions. Tsunade approved the mission immediately, and Naruto found himself traveling to the Sand Village for the first time since the Fourth Shinobi War, though the circumstances were vastly different from the battle-torn landscape he'd left behind. Master Chiyo, the elderly Sand Village elder who had fought alongside Naruto years before, personally received him in the village. She was even more ancient than Elder Kokodan now, but her eyes still held their characteristic shrewdness. The boy who was once an enemy comes now as a savior, Chiyo said with a slight smile. The world truly does work in mysterious ways. Come, let me show you the extent of our problem. She led Naruto to the agricultural regions on the outskirts of the village. What he saw was sobering. The soil was cracked and desiccated, barely holding any moisture. Irrigation channels that should have been carrying water were dry. Crops had withered to brown, brittle stalks. The animals that depended on the water sources had been moved to emergency reservoirs, but those too were running dangerously low. This is the 3rd year of drought, Chiyo explained as they surveyed the damage. We have sufficient reserves to survive another year if we are extremely careful with rationing, but the economic impact is severe. Farmers are losing their livelihoods. Families are beginning to migrate to other villages and regions. If this continues much longer, the Sand Village may not recover. Naruto felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't a dramatic battle or a demonstration of power. This was something far more fundamental, the lives and livelihoods of an entire population depending on his ability to affect the weather. What do you want me to start? He asked. The eastern agricultural regions have the greatest concentration of crops, Chiyo replied. If we can restore water there, we can provide seeds and resources to farmers to replant. Over time, the vegetation should help restore the water cycle naturally. Naruto spent the next week working on bringing rain to the Sand Village. But it wasn't as simple as just creating clouds and causing rain. The underlying atmospheric patterns that had led to the drought were complex. High-pressure systems, changes in air currents, shifts in temperature gradients that had disrupted the normal patterns of precipitation. Simply creating rain without addressing the underlying causes would only provide temporary relief. Naruto needed to fundamentally adjust the atmospheric conditions in the region. Elder Kokodan, who had accompanied Naruto to the Sand Village, helped him understand the deeper patterns. A drought is not created by the absence of moisture, the old hermit explained as they studied weather patterns together. It is created by atmospheric conditions that prevent precipitation. You must think not in terms of creating rain, but in terms of restoring the conditions that naturally lead to rain. Under Kokodan's guidance, Naruto began working with the broader weather systems affecting the region. He created subtle changes in temperature gradients that caused air masses to rise and cool. He adjusted moisture patterns in the atmosphere, encouraging water vapor to move toward the agricultural regions. He created air currents that helped establish new patterns of weather circulation. The effect was gradual but steady. The first day, a light rain fell. The second day, more substantial precipitation. By the fourth day, the region was receiving moderate but sustained rainfall, the kind of weather that allows for plant growth and water accumulation without causing flooding or damage. The farmers of the Sand Village watched in amazement as their parched fields began to green again. Seeds that had been stored from previous years were planted, and with the consistent moisture provided by Naruto's adjusted weather patterns, they sprouted and grew rapidly. On the 7th day, Master Chiyo approached Naruto with tears in her eyes, a remarkable display of emotion from the normally stoic elder. You have given our village a second chance, she said simply. I do not know how to properly repay such a debt. You don't need to repay anything, Naruto replied. That's not what this is about. This is about helping people. That's what I've always been about. But as he said the words, he realized something profound. His entire understanding of power had shifted. What he'd once seen as strength, the ability to defeat enemies, to win battles, to dominate opponents, had been revealed as a shallow definition. True strength, he was beginning to understand, was the ability to help, to heal, to restore. And that required a far deeper mastery than simple combat prowess. When Naruto returned to the Hidden Leaf Village after 2 weeks in the Sand Village, he found that his humanitarian efforts had sparked a wave of similar requests from other regions and nations. The Mist Village sent a request for assistance with coastal erosion caused by unusual storm patterns. A region in the Earth Country was suffering from flooding due to excessive rainfall and requested Naruto's help in adjusting water patterns and managing runoff. Even the Cloud Village, initially the most skeptical of Naruto's abilities, requested assistance in addressing some unusual atmospheric phenomena that had been affecting their region. Tsunade presented these requests to him in a meeting that included Kakashi, Sakura, and Jiraiya. "You've become very popular," the Hokage said with a slight smile. "The question is, how do we manage these requests in a way that doesn't completely consume your time and energy?" "I could go to each of these places and help," Naruto said immediately. "That's what I'm capable of doing." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because you're also a shinobi of this village," Kakashi said gently. "You have responsibilities here as well. And there's another concern: you're creating dependency. If people come to rely on you to fix their environmental problems, what happens when you're not available? What if you're injured? What if there's a crisis elsewhere that requires your attention?" "Kakashi's right," Jiraiya added. "You need to think about this strategically. You can't solve every problem. But you can teach people how to solve their own problems, which has far greater long-term impact." It was a hard truth to accept, but Naruto understood the logic. Instead of simply traveling to each region and fixing the environmental issues himself, he began a different kind of work, training local naturalists and environmental specialists in techniques that would allow them to manage their own situations. The Sand Village was his first major project. He spent 2 weeks training a group of Sand Village shinobi in basic weather manipulation and environmental sensing. Master Chio helped him identify people with natural affinities for environmental manipulation, and under Naruto's instruction and Elder Kakuden's guidance, these individuals began to develop their own naturalist abilities. The work was incredibly fulfilling, but it was also exhausting in a different way than direct combat or environmental manipulation. Teaching required patience, understanding, and the ability to break down complex concepts into understandable components. It required him to confront his own knowledge gaps. There were many things he did automatically through intuition that he struggled to explain rationally. But gradually, he found his rhythm. The Sand Village's environmental specialists began to develop real competence. After just a few weeks of training, they were able to maintain the weather patterns and water distribution systems that Naruto had established, adjusting them as conditions changed. The other regions followed similar patterns. Naruto would spend time assessing their environmental issues, working with local specialists to understand the underlying systems, and then training them in techniques that would allow them to manage the situation independently. But the constant travel and intensive training began to take a toll. Naruto found himself increasingly isolated, traveling from region to region with Elder Kokodan and a rotating cast of specialists, never staying in one place long enough to maintain his personal relationships. It was Hinata who finally confronted him about it, during one of his brief visits back to the village. They were walking through the same gardens where they'd spoken before his departure to the Temple of Green Harmony, and Hinata took his hand without asking permission. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said simply. "Even for you, this is excessive." "There's so much that needs to be done," Naruto replied. "And I'm the only one who can do it right now. These people are suffering, Hinata. If I can help, how can I refuse?" "You can refuse because you're human," Hinata said, her pale eyes fixed on his face. "Even naturalists are human, Naruto. You need rest. You need time to maintain your own connections, your own life. If you burn yourself out trying to help everyone, you'll be no help to anyone." He knew she was right, but accepting that knowledge and actually changing his behavior were two different things. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, and he found himself unable to rest even when he was supposedly relaxing. That night, Naruto sat alone in his apartment, staring at the small sapling that the Temple of Green Harmony had given him. The young tree had grown significantly. It was now nearly as tall as Naruto himself, and it had developed its first real branches. Looking at it, he realized something. The heart tree at the temple had taken 3,000 years to reach its current size and power. His own abilities weren't something that needed to be fully utilized immediately. They were something that would develop and mature over time, just like the sapling's growth. The insight came with a revelation about balance, not just the balance between nature and humanity, but the balance between his power and his life. He needed to use his abilities responsibly, but he also needed to live as a human, with human connections and human needs. The next morning, he went to see Tsunade and proposed a modified approach. He would continue training regional specialists and assisting with major environmental crises, but he would base himself in the Hidden Leaf Village. He would take on a limited number of missions at any given time, ensuring that he had time for his personal relationships and his own recovery. Tsunade approved the plan, and Naruto began to establish a more sustainable rhythm. However, not everyone was pleased with Naruto's growing influence and importance. As his humanitarian efforts gained more publicity, there was a corresponding rise in certain political factions who viewed his power as a threat rather than a blessing. A group that called themselves the Natural Order Alliance began circulating pamphlets claiming that Naruto's manipulation of natural systems was unnatural and would eventually lead to environmental catastrophe. They argued that using naturalist abilities, no matter how well-intentioned, was fundamentally disrupting the balance of nature, and that humanity should live within the limits nature provided rather than trying to overcome those limits through artificial means. Most people dismissed these arguments as reactionary and backwards-looking, but there were others, particularly in regions that had developed sophisticated systems for managing environmental challenges through technology and infrastructure rather than jutsu, who found the arguments concerning. The most vocal opposition came from a group of environmental engineers from the Earth country who had spent decades developing irrigation systems and water management infrastructure. They saw Naruto's offered assistance as both a threat to their livelihoods and a fundamentally misguided approach to environmental challenges. What this young naturalist proposes is regression. Their representative, a man named Engineer Dako, stated at a formal conference discussing environmental policy and Naruto's role in addressing regional crises. He would have us abandon the careful systems we've built over decades and rely instead on the unpredictable abilities of a single individual. What happens when this young man grows old? What happens if he becomes incapacitated? What happens if his political loyalties shift, and he refuses to help us anymore? We would be left defenseless. These are legitimate concerns, Tsunade acknowledged, though her tone suggested she disagreed with the underlying premise. However, Naruto's role is not meant to replace human ingenuity and technological development. It's meant to supplement those efforts, particularly in situations where traditional approaches are insufficient. But the criticism stung Naruto nonetheless. He began to question his own approach, to wonder if he was truly helping or if he was, as the critics suggested, creating unhealthy dependency relationships. Elder Kokodan addressed these doubts during one of their meditation sessions. Of course there are people who will oppose what you do, the old hermit said without any particular sympathy. This has always been true of any power. There are those who fear what they don't understand, those who benefit from the status quo and resist change, and those who genuinely believe that alternative approaches are superior. You cannot please everyone, nor should you try to do so. But what if they're right? Naruto asked. What if I'm creating dependency relationships that will ultimately harm people? Then you learn, you adjust, you find a better way, Kokodan replied simply. The goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to act with good intentions, learn from mistakes, and constantly strive to improve. You're doing that. The fact that you're questioning your own approach demonstrates that you're taking your responsibility seriously. Still, Naruto decided to modify his approach further. Instead of offering direct assistance to regions, he began working more extensively with local specialists to help them develop their own naturalist capabilities. He spent less time manifesting environmental changes himself, and more time teaching others how to do so. This approach took longer and required more patience, but it addressed many of the concerns that had been raised. Communities that had trained their own naturalists could manage environmental challenges independently, without relying on Naruto's continued presence or assistance. It also, interestingly, led to the discovery that naturalist abilities were more common than previously believed. There were dozens of people with latent naturalist potential. They simply had never trained or developed these abilities because they hadn't been aware of their existence. By identifying and training these individuals, Naruto was essentially democratizing access to abilities that had previously been the exclusive domain of a few rare individuals. 6 months after the Accord of Balance was signed, Naruto stood before the Council of 5 Great Nations, presenting a formal proposal that would change the structure of environmental management across the shinobi world. I propose the establishment of a formal naturalist order, Naruto began, his presentation steady and professional, a far cry from the uncertain young ninja he'd been just a year before. This order would be open to anyone with naturalist potential, regardless of which nation they come from. Specialists from the order would be available to assist in managing environmental crises, but the primary focus would be on building local capacity in each nation so that communities can manage their own environmental challenges independently. And who would oversee this naturalist order? Captain Seiya from the Cloud Village asked. The Temple of Green Harmony has agreed to serve as the spiritual and educational center for the order, Naruto replied. The actual governance would be handled by representatives from each nation, with Abbot Senrei serving as an advisor rather than a leader. The goal is to create a truly international organization that transcends national boundaries while respecting the autonomy of individual nations. The proposal generated significant discussion, and it took several more meetings before all the nations agreed to the formal establishment of the naturalist order. But when the agreement was finally finalized, it represented something revolutionary, an international organization dedicated to environmental management and restoration. Operating across national borders and political divisions, Naruto was offered the position of first naturalist, essentially the public face and leading representative of the organization. He turned it down, instead recommending that the position be held by a rotation of the most experienced naturalists from different nations. But he agreed to serve as an advisor and to continue his work training new naturalists. The establishment of the naturalist order represented a fundamental shift in how Naruto understood his power and his role in the world. He was no longer just a powerful shinobi with impressive abilities. He was a catalyst for change, a teacher, a bridge between nations, and a symbol of what could be accomplished when power was wielded with wisdom and compassion. But with that new understanding came new pressures. Political factions in various nations began trying to court Naruto's favor, hoping to secure his support for their own agendas. There were offers of wealth, status, and authority. There were also subtle threats, suggestions that if he didn't support particular initiatives, there might be consequences. Naruto refused all of it, but not with the simple idealism of his younger self. Instead, he refused with the mature understanding that accepting any of these offers would compromise his ability to serve the greater good. His power came from his independence, from his willingness to help all people regardless of political boundaries or national allegiances. The moment he aligned himself with a particular faction or nation's interests, his effectiveness would be diminished. It was a lonely position in many ways. Naruto was simultaneously more powerful and more isolated than ever before. He had the respect of nations and the admiration of millions of people who had benefited from the naturalist order's environmental work. But he had few truly close relationships outside of his original circle of friends. One evening, as Naruto sat meditating with the sapling that had become a small tree over the course of the past year, Sakura found him. "You're isolating yourself," she said without preamble, settling down beside him on the meditation cushion. "I have to," Naruto replied. "The position I'm in requires a certain distance, a certain neutrality." "No," Sakura interrupted. "The position you've put yourself in requires those things. But you don't have to maintain that separation from your actual friends. We're not asking for favors or political support. We're just asking for you to remain human. To remain part of our lives, not just as a powerful ally but as a friend and teammate." It was a necessary reminder, and Naruto took it to heart. He began spending more time in the village, more time with his friends, more time building the personal connections that kept him grounded. He started training regularly with Kakashi again. He spent time helping Sakura with medical research. He attended celebrations and festivals instead of always being away on some important mission. And most importantly, he spent time with Hinata, just being present, just existing in her company without the weight of the world on his shoulders. The balance he established wasn't perfect, but it was sustainable. Naruto had learned what Elder Kokodan and Abbot Zenrei had been trying to teach him all along. True mastery of power came not from isolation and dedication, but from maintaining connection to humanity while wielding that power with wisdom and compassion. As the year drew to a close and Naruto reflected on everything that had changed, he realized that the most important lesson wasn't about controlling weather or manipulating earth and stone. It was about understanding that power without purpose was merely destruction, but power wielded in service of others, while maintaining one's own humanity, could genuinely improve the world. The sapling from the heart tree had grown to the height of Naruto himself, and looking at it, he understood that this was his future as well. Not a sudden, dramatic achievement of ultimate power, but a gradual, steady growth toward becoming something greater while remaining fundamentally rooted in who he was.